Thanks, John. And good afternoon, everybody. Lovely to be here. I'm from Canberra, so the cold is no surprise to me at all. In your programs, it says I'm going to be talking about making your... That's good, because I like to move around to make it difficult for the guy with the video. So programs, the title of the presentation is Making a Strategy Stick, and my business partner and I have been involved in developing lots of knowledge strategies, lots of business strategies, and the last 4 years we've been much more involved in the execution of strategy than the development. And you'll find out why in a little while. And so we were thinking about this presentation because Sean, my business partner, is talking at KM Australia in a few weeks' time on a similar topic, and we were thinking about what is the challenge that we're trying to achieve with a knowledge and information strategy, in fact with any strategy. And we went through the challenges, and it resulted in us coming up with this list of 8 things, the 8 challenges. And we've decided to tackle the presentation from that perspective because it's really important. I could stand here and tell you what to do, but then I'd be making the same mistake that we often make with our strategies, which is they focus on what, not on why. So this presentation is about the challenges that you face in executing any strategy, and as a way of explaining why we're doing it and why we do things as we are. Now, Anecdote, our byline is putting stories to work. We've been working for about 10 years on helping organisations tap into this incredible natural power of stories, something that human beings are incredibly attuned to and which are incredibly effective in a whole bunch of different ways, but which we've sort of built out of our systems and structures and educational processes and organisations large and small. And so, our belief is that we can really help restore humanity to organisations and make organisations more effective by tapping into this power. So, I'll cover 8 ways to kill your knowledge strategy and finish up with some, well, I guess I'll cover some ideas on how to overcome these as we go through them. And I'll finish with some examples of things that we think are really effective in helping you overcome some of these challenges. Just in terms of local government, Anecdote has been working for the last 4 years as the Communities of Practice partner with under a New South Wales Environment Trust grant, which is focused on establishing communities of practice in 5 partner councils in New South Wales, and the communities of practice are focused on sustainability and/or community engagement and education. So we've got a lot of insight, I guess, into the local government sector in the last 4 years. That program's still underway and it wraps up in August. So we're about to embark on a dissemination series because it's worked really well. We started the program 4 years ago with the banner of this isn't going to work in local government because local government's different. And the purpose of the project was to demonstrate that communities of practice work in a local government. And we've demonstrated that, and the New South Wales Environment Trust increased the funding late last year, and we've engaged another 5 councils in the last 6 months to do the same thing. So I guess there's a level of uniqueness about local government, but there's also the sector bears many similarities to every other organisation because they're full of people. Okay, so moving on. A recent study of 460 organisations showed that 80% of the people in those organisations didn't understand the strategy. Okay, hands up who's got a strategy in their organisation. Hands up if you can tell me in 4 minutes what that strategy is in a way that I understand it. No hands. Okay, look, it's the same everywhere. We have strategies, but we don't understand them. It's impossible for people to act strategically if they don't know what your strategy is. A friend of mine took up a job as a regional sales and marketing director for an international company. Her first action was to go and say, what's our strategy so that I can implement it in my region? And she was told, it's kept in the safe. You can't see it. She wasn't with that company 3 weeks later. So It's not always, that's a bit tongue-in-cheek, that example, because it's not because it's a secret that strategies aren't understood in organisations. It's because of the way we go about it. So, with that as the challenge, we're going to examine 8 ways that you can kill your strategy, your knowledge and information strategy. The guy with the smiling face, his name is Lou Gerstner. The IBM logo might have given it away. He took over as the CEO of IBM in 1993 at a time when IBM was bleeding billions of dollars a year and about to go under. 3 or 4 years later, he's restored IBM to renewed profitability and growth, and he was the CEO up until 2002. Gerstner says, focus on strategy, not on your focus on the execution, not on your strategy. He says all strategies are essentially the same. The difference is how you execute them. He stated there's 3 factors that you need to be able to execute a strategy effectively. You need good processes, you need a high-performance culture, and you need strategic clarity. Okay, so this presentation is about strategic clarity. So, focus on the strategy, not the execution. It's the #1 reason why strategies fail. It's like the reason many IT projects fail is because we invest in the technology and not in the change. It's the same with strategy. Just recently, working with the CIO of a very large energy company, and they have spent $1.5 million in 18 months developing their IT strategy. It was 86 pages long. The executive summary was a 26-slide PowerPoint deck. And he goes, no one understands it. And so the investment in that strategy is useless. There's no return on that investment, or very little return on the investment, unless you focus on the execution. I'll come back to that example a little later. So I guess that's the first reason that strategies fail, is we focus on the development of the strategy, not on its execution. So the second reason that strategies fail is that people don't understand them. Sometimes it's because they're thick. But most of the time, people don't understand our strategies because of the way we develop and communicate them. Let me explain. I'm about to show you a little clip. It goes for a minute, and it's an animation, and I'd just like you to watch it. And at the end, I'm going to ask you what was going on. So I know you're thinking, okay, John did say these guys were quirky, and they'll explain it. No, there's a very good reason I showed you this clip. Can anyone tell me what they think was going on? What was happening? Anyone at all? What was happening in that clip?
The big triangle was trying to get the little triangle. The big triangle was trying to get the little triangle and the circle into the box, and they wouldn't. And then they revolted and nipped off, and the big triangle smashed the box.
Fantastic. Anyone else? What was going on? What was happening in that clip? Somebody from this table.
A series of confrontations. A series of confrontations.
A bit more info? that's what I took away from it. All right,
It ended badly.
who was the aggressor?
The large triangle.
Large triangle was the aggressor. Okay. Anyone else? What was going on? Here we go.
The big circle had to get the big circle had to get the big triangle had to get the circle into the box without the little triangle in the center. So it's just like a line of sight thing, and yeah, what was the end
Okay. So this clip was shown for the first time in 1944. It was developed by a researcher in the US called Fritz Heider, and the first time it was shown to 113 people. 109 people described what was happening as human beings interacting. It's called anthropomorphizing. You go, okay, the big triangle's a bully and the bullying, blah, blah. So 109 people said it was described it as human beings interacting. 3 people described it as animals, and 1 person said, well, they're geometric shapes moving around on a 2-dimensional plane. And it's been shown to tens of thousands of people since then, and the pattern is the same. And the lesson, and this is a lesson not just for strategy, but a lesson for life, and that is that human beings, when they are confronted with something that is ambiguous, construct a story to make sense of it. We are sense-making machines. We use stories. We construct a story to make sense of the world. And it's not about right or wrong, it's simply about plausibility. We think about it until we've got a plausible explanation, and then we move on. So if we saw Julia Gillard in the cavalcade go past here, we'd immediately start conjecturing as to why she was there. And I might say, isn't she got a speaking engagement? Blah, blah, blah. Someone else would say, no. Her Victorian office is just down the road here. And I'd immediately throw mine out and replace it with the one that was more plausible. Anyone ever had a problem with the grapevine? Now the rumour mill? We often think about that in a completely wrong way. We think these are bad people trying to undermine me. Well, it's not. It's just human beings doing what they do. They don't understand something, so they've made up a story to make sense of the world. It just doesn't happen to be the one that agrees with the official line, and that's what human beings do. But the point here is that if you communicate your strategy ambiguously, if you construct it ambiguously, people will not understand it. They will have to make something up, and it might not be what you intend. And it's the same whether it's a knowledge or an information strategy or a business strategy or anything else, talking to your kids. So, something that's abstract, the dictionary gives us a few clues here. Abstract, disassociated from any specific instance, difficult to understand. And there's some examples there of abstract statements. Collaboration across divisions, improved knowledge retention, enhanced search capability, innovation, distribution, best practices, etc. Are these statements ambiguous or are they concrete? Anyone?
They've no context.
They have no context, and therefore they are abstract, difficult to understand. And you can easily... anyone recognise these sorts of things? Anyone have any of these in their organisation? On their own, without context, they are meaningless statements. And you can give them meaning simply by using examples. Right? So the dictionary definition, disassociated from any specific instance, all you need to do is to give specific instances to illustrate the point you're trying to make. And it's a little harder than it seems because we are really accustomed to talking in generalisations and assertions in business, in organisations. We're really accustomed to it. We are very unaccustomed to using, in a business context, examples. And an example looks like this. 3 weeks ago, Gary walked into the office and he asked me for a piece of information. I said, in your ear, mate, this is my piece of information I'm not sharing with you. Right? So that's obviously bad behaviour that you wouldn't want to see in your organisation. But an example has a time marker, it's got characters and it's got specific events. We don't do that very well in business, and therefore we have a lot of our communications are abstract and hard to understand. Right? It's not bad people doing bad things, it's just the way we are, and you can overcome it by introducing some examples. So, moving on to the third reasons why knowledge strategies fail. often they are completely forgettable. And I will be just keeping an eye on you, right? Because I am a really good shot with these things. So hopefully you won't look like that during the presentation. But strategies can be completely forgettable, and the gentleman here pointed out things without context are completely forgettable. Okay, hands up who's given a presentation in the last 6 months. Okay, hands up who had slides full of bullet points. Okay, well, I'm not trying to be offensive with what I'm about to say. John walked on the roof, Bill picked up the eggs, Pete put on the helmet, Jim gave a speech, Frank built a boat, Harvey flicked the electric switch, Ted wrote the play. Who walked on the roof? Bill, Ted, John? Who wrote the play? Ted. Excellent. Who picked up the eggs? Okay, got another list for you. Santa Claus walked on the roof, Easter Bunny picked up the eggs, Ned Cully put on the helmet, Bill Clinton gave a speech, Noah built a boat, Edison flicked the electric switch, William Shakespeare wrote the play. Who walked on the roof? Who picked up the eggs?
Easter Bunny.
Who wrote the play? Who gave the speech? Blah, blah, blah. Do you understand? Do you get the difference between those two lists? Giving people bullet points without context, without an example to illustrate it, means that it will be completely forgettable. Jerome Bruner has done a whole bunch of research on this. We are 22 times more likely to remember an example, a story, than we are to remember a bullet point or a fact. So, do your audience, any audience, whether it's an audience like this or an audience in an organisation who are going to be reading a piece of correspondence about your knowledge and information strategy or plans for the internet or whatever, use examples, because otherwise it's completely forgettable. In October last year, I gave a presentation at the Australian Human Resources Institute Leadership Conference in Canberra, and Michelle Cornish, who's a Deputy Secretary in the Department of DUA, Education, Employment, Workplace Relations, she gave a presentation on HR governance immediately before me. 1 hour presentation, she was a very good speaker, by the way. In the middle of her presentation, she put up a slide and she said, these are the 7 key drivers of HR governance, and these are really important. We all need to get our heads around these. These are things that will affect us in the future. Which was cool. We walked past each other on the steps. I was going up the steps to the podium, she was coming down, and I asked her if she would be happy for me to do a little experiment. I didn't have time to explain it in any detail, but she sort of went, oh yeah, okay. And I went and apologised to her later. But I said, I'm going to talk to you about storytelling and why it's important. Who can remember, Michelle just gave a presentation. In the middle of her talk, she put up the slide, the 7 key drivers. She said, these are the 7 things that we must remember, blah, blah, blah. Without looking at your notes, can anyone tell me any 2 of the points on that list? 130 people in the room. How many hands do you think went up? None. I left it for a minute. Start to hear the paper rattling, and then a few hands went up. And of course, that, I just point out that it's okay. Now, Michelle had also spoken earlier in the day on a panel, and she talked about how she was a career woman and what happened when she had her first child. And so I said, does anyone remember what happened when Michelle had her first child and wanted to go back to work? How many hands in the room went up? 130 hands, because she'd said, I was a career woman and I wanted to be successful and I didn't want to have any time out of the workforce. I got pregnant, I took the minimum amount of time off and planning to be back at work as soon as possible so I could continue to climb the career ladder. And then I had my baby and I realised that was really, really, really important. And I wanted to have my full measure of maternity leave. So I flew to Canberra, saw my boss, told him the situation, and he said, no, you have to come back to work. And that's the difference between a bullet point and a story. In fact, I'm going to use examples to illustrate every point I make today. And if you want to remember any of them, don't try and write them out in full. Just make a couple of notes. Story about the conference presentation in Canberra. You'll be amazed at how those will trigger. You'll look at them later and you'll still be able to recite reasonably well the examples that I give you. Okay, so strategies fail because people don't understand them. People's strategies fail because people don't remember them. And of course you want them to remember them, because how many times are you sitting in a meeting and somebody says, let's do this? How many times do you have the strategy document that you pull out and go, oh, well, let's consult the strategy? Right? It never happens, or almost never. So your strategy, you're making all these decisions on a day-to-day basis, and your strategy isn't in the room. So it's the way to get your strategy in the room. So the fourth point about, or the fourth reason that you can, or fourth way you can kill your knowledge strategy, it doesn't explain to the business how it's going to help them win. And look, a simple example from that, we're working with an industry association in Sydney, or based in Sydney, national association based in Sydney, and they're introducing SAP and a whole bunch of capabilities around that, intranet, blah, blah, blah. So I asked the question, how will this help the business win? And they went, they'll have unified search and things like this. The business, having unified search isn't a business driver. That's your perspective. You need to be able to translate that sort of stuff into language that helps explain why the business is going to be better off because of your knowledge information strategy. Again, examples are fantastic at doing that. Find an example of things that are going wrong and say, by doing this, we'll tackle that instance and we'll make it look like something else. Make it look like something else, and you tell them another example of what it might look like in the future. So, fifth way you can kill your knowledge strategy. This is the beauty. We do it all the time. We focus on what and not why. Human beings crave why. The details are often completely insignificant until we know the big picture. And yet our strategies, and go and have a look at your strategies, they're often full of lists of what we're going to do, and there's very, very little coverage of why we're going to do it. So, to illustrate the point, I'm just going to ask you to read that mass of text. Any clues on what that's about? Does this help? The big picture is vital to understanding. And all of those details that I gave you, or that were on in that list of stuff, means nothing until you have the context. And yet we often, when we're implementing strategy, we focus on what? We focus on the details, not on the why. So we advocate that strategy development's really, really important. You've got to get it right, but you need to do it in a way that has a focus on execution. And I'll give you some examples right at the end of what we call a strategic story, how you can explain why in a memorable way that people can understand. Number 6. My apologies, anyone from internal comms. We're working with Department of Human Services last year. We'd been working with them to develop their strategic story for customer service delivery. And internal comms were aware of the project. There was a lot of, we did a lot of consultation with staff, and internal comms said, right, we need to be driving this. And so we had a meeting, and the guys from internal comms were sitting there, and they were very interested in things like channels. What channel? So Mark, what channel is the main channel for distribution of this? Is it going to be online, or is it going to be documents? And I'm looking at them. It took me a while to actually figure out what they were saying. And I said, the main channel for the strategy is the leaders. That's their job. Oh, yeah, well, they'll see it as well. It's like, no. This is not about transmitting information to people. This is about leaders leading. So you need to develop your strategy in a way that has a view to the leaders being the ones who communicate it through the business, not just leaving it to internal comms. Right? Because you'll get a nice brochure and it'll be beautifully designed and it'll have lots of good words in it. But seriously, the whole thing about this is about strategy. Execution requires leadership. And that brings us to the next point, which is this is a surprisingly common pattern. And the seventh reason why, or seventh way you can kill your strategy, leaders are not on the same page. So we start all of our strategy execution projects, all of our projects to develop strategic stories by interviewing the leaders to ascertain their take on the strategy and get an idea of the extent to which they have a common understanding of what it is. And often it is almost zero. It's crazy. Right? And the reason is that the strategy has been developed and communicated in making some of the mistakes that I've already listed. It's not memorable, it's not concrete. People have to interpret it in different ways. And so you end up with organisations tearing themselves apart because leaders are taking the organisation in different directions. Because something's abstract, something's ambiguous, they have to construct meaning, and they do it from their own frames, from their own perspective. So, you know, I'm in charge of this part of the organisation, and I've got this view, and somebody else has got a different view, and they get together and they have conversations that go like this, because they're not talking about the same issue. So, seventh best way to kill a strategy is to have leaders not on the same page. And the final one, and the best way to kill, or not the best way, but a really effective way to kill a strategy, is for people not to believe it. With every organisation, with every strategy, there's things that we call them anti-stories. These are very powerful beliefs, historical events that work against your strategy. Best way for me to explain it is with an example. Transport and main roads in Queensland were brought together by a machinery government change in 2009 in January, and it brought together Harbours and Marine, Department of Main Roads and Department of Transport. So the leadership team got together and we're working on their knowledge, on their strategic story. Okay, so what are we going to do? Why are we going to do it, etc. I'll take you through the process. And the main thing that they needed to do, and they knew it, was to integrate three big departments, billions of dollars, thousands, tens of thousands of staff, affecting almost every aspect of life and commerce in Queensland, and they knew that they need to integrate. They needed to work together, break down the silos, etc. We had a great session, came up with a fantastic outline of their strategic story. I got in the lift. There's a guy I knew in the lift. We're going down from the 26th floor to the ground, and he said, "What are you doing here, Mark?" And I explained and said, "Oh, yeah, strategic story, integration, etc." And he just looked at me and he said, "What?" And I'm going, "Oh, what do you mean, what?" And he goes, "What integration? Man, we're all just waiting for the next divorce." And my ears pricked up and I went, "Okay, let me buy you a cup of coffee." So in 1992 or 93, those same three departments had been brought together by machinery government change. 5 years later, they'd been separated again. So 97 or whatever. And he goes, "We're just waiting for that to happen again. No one's going to integrate." And that can you imagine a leader standing in front of his organisation and going to talk about their strategy of integration, and everyone in the room sitting there with their arms crossed going, "Next divorce, next divorce, next divorce." Your strategy's torpedoed. So, if you've got a strategy of collaboration, if your organisational story is that you don't collaborate, you're way behind the eight ball. Now, this sounds a lot worse than it is. All you have to do is honestly acknowledge that these things exist. that these anti-stories exist. Pretending they don't exist, which is what we normally do, we don't talk about the bad stuff that happened. Pretending they don't exist is a great way to kill your knowledge strategy. With the Transport and Main Roads, Dave Stewart was the Director General, and I sat down and had a talk with him, and he explained that he was around back in 1993, 94, when they were brought together and then divorced. And he goes, and I was in Main Roads, and I'm an engineer, and we built stuff, and we never talked to those guys up in Transport because they were in their building, and we called them shiny bums. They used to sit there and their backsides used to shine their chairs, and that's what they did. We actively avoided talking to them. And he goes, and you know what? Man, that was such a huge mistake because we built the road corridor to the Sunshine Coast at the same time they designed the rail corridor. We never talked to each other. It's a complete disaster. So when he first told the story, the strategic story to his organisation, he just said, now look, in 1993 we were brought together, and 97 we were separated. He goes, and we did it ourselves because I was there and I saw the way we behaved. And he said, we just have to learn from that. We contributed to it. We have to learn from that and not make the same mistake again. Right? So this time we need to integrate for real. And he tackled it head on. And we've written a paper on this, which is available on our website, Anecdote.com. It goes through a whole bunch of different patterns of these anti-stories and how to tackle them. But if you don't tackle them, your strategy is not believable, and it's going to be killed stone dead, because these anti-stories are incredibly powerful. So that is 8 reasons or 8 ways to kill your knowledge strategy. Just going to give you a couple of solutions now. Anecdote, our tagline's putting stories to work. That's what we do, we work with stories. And so if you can turn your strategy into a strategic story, you can immediately overcome a whole bunch of the issues that the traditional execution of strategy faces. So not being understandable, not being memorable, leaders not being on the same page, etc. You can overcome a lot of those. And I kid you not, we've done many, many dozens of these for organisations large and small, and we can always translate a strategy into a document that big. It's not easy, It was Blaise Pascal who said, I've written you a long letter because I didn't have time to write you a short one. Right? It's not easy because you actually have to have some really tough conversations because there is no space for ambiguity in a document of that size. And this is not a plan on the page, by the way. It's also hard to get to a plan on the page, but this is a story. It's very different from a plan on the page. It's not a set of bullet points. So here's the solution, step number 1 to overcoming all of these ways to kill a knowledge strategy, and that is to have a strategic story. It's got a simple framework that looks like this. There's like a narrative for your strategy, which is in the past, we used to do this. We were really good at this stuff and we're not so good at this. And then the world changed. And this happened. And because of that, we are focused on a few key things. So this is the what are you going to do bit. But you notice that the what are you going to do bit is the actual strategy. That's the strategy. That's the bit that normally gets written down, absent this stuff. Right, so I mentioned the why, in the past, and then something happened. That provides the context, it provides the why. And then the real task is to come up with a very short list of things that you're going to do. And then the last column, or the last panel as we call it, if we do these things really well, then we're going to look like this. We'll be much more efficient because we won't be recreating the wheel across different divisions every other day. So the strategic story starts with the broad narrative, but then you need to find the moments that bring it to life. So specific instances that illustrate your points. So the example with Dave Stewart and Transport and Main Roads in Queensland, he talked about the time when we developed, or we built the road corridor at the same time they designed the rail corridor, right? It's a specific event. In fact, it's a little bit, it's not as specific as I'd like, but moments are powerful. So anyway, that's sort of the structure that you can use to develop your strategic story. And it looks very simple. It is very simple. But like many simple things, it requires a lot of effort, and you really need to think deeply about what you're doing and the process by which you're doing it to arrive at that. So, narrative and moments. So that was the first solution step, if you like, and the next one is this one. Once you've got your strategic story, you need to teach people how to tell it, because that's how it comes to life in an organisation. I mentioned earlier a project where we got a phone call from the CIO of an energy company. Their strategy was 86 pages and a 26-page PowerPoint deck was their executive summary. He rang us. He said, "Can you help?" We went in and developed a strategic story. We taught the leaders how to tell it. 10 weeks after we'd finished teaching leaders to tell it across the country, he called us and said, "I've just been out to Dubbo. We've got a little site out there." And he goes, "I cannot believe it. I just walked in, had a cup of coffee with the guys, and I asked them, amongst other things, I said, 'So can anyone give me a bit of an idea of what our strategy is?' He said, every one of them could give a half-decent description of what our strategy is. And that's 10 weeks after starting, or after finishing teaching leaders how to tell it. Stories are like, if you do it well, stories are like wildfire in your organisation, right? Good ones and bad ones. And this is just a way of taking your strategy, turning it into a story, and then having it go viral in your organisation. And it makes, folks, it works. So, strategy execution doesn't have to be staid and sterile. It's actually a really organic process, and it can be lots of fun. So, I'm going to finish by asking you to watch a 4-minute video of a leader telling the story of their strategy in 4 minutes, and it's a very complex strategy. It's Steve Jobs telling the world about Apple's cloud strategy. This is from the Worldwide Developers Conference in the US in June or July last year, a couple of months before Steve Jobs passed away. It's one of the last big talks that he gave. So we've added the subtitles. So the subtitles illustrate the parts of the components of the story that I talked about. So 4 minutes.
We've been working on this for some time now, and we're really excited about it. About 10 years ago, we had one of our most important insights, and that was that the PC was going to become the digital hub for your digital life. What did that mean? Well, it meant that that's where you were going to put your digital photos. Where else were you going to put them? Your digital video off your digital camcorder, and of course your music, right? You were going to acquire it in the device or potentially on your Mac, and you were going to basically sync it to the Mac, and everything was going to work fine. And it did for the better part of 10 years, but it's broken down in the last few years. Why? Well, because the devices have changed. They now all have music. They now all have photos. They now all have video. And so if I acquire a song, I buy it right on my iPhone, I want to get that to my other devices. Right? I pick up my iPad and it doesn't have that song on it. So I have to sync my iPhone to my Mac. Then I have to sync my other devices to the Mac to get that song. But then they deposited some photos on the Mac, so I have to sync the iPhone again with the Mac to get those photos. And keeping these devices in sync is driving us crazy. So, we've got a great solution for this problem. And we think this solution is our next big insight, which is we're going to demote the PC and the Mac to just be a device. Just like an iPhone, an iPad, or iPod Touch. And we're going to move the digital hub, the center of your digital life, into the cloud. Because all these new devices have communications built into them. They can all talk to the cloud whenever they want. And so now, If I get something on my iPhone, it's sent up to the cloud immediately. Let's say I take some pictures with it. Those pictures are in the cloud, and they are now pushed down to my devices completely automatically. And now everything's in sync with me not even having to think about it. I don't even have to take the devices out of my pocket. I don't have to be near my Mac or PC. Now, some people think the cloud is just a hard disk in the sky, right? And you take a bunch of stuff and you put it in your Dropbox or your iDisk or whatever, and it transfers it up to the cloud and stores it, then you drag whatever you want back out on your other devices. We think it's way more than that, and we call it iCloud. Now, iCloud stores your content in the cloud and wirelessly pushes it to all your devices. So it automatically uploads it, stores it, and automatically pushes it to all your other devices. But also, it's completely integrated with your apps. And so everything happens automatically, and there's nothing new to learn. It just all works. It just works. Now, you might ask, why should I believe them? They're the ones that brought me MobileMe. It wasn't our finest hour. Let me just say that. But we learned a lot. Now, the 3 core apps in MobileMe were Contacts, Calendar, and Mail. 3 things we'd obviously like kept up to date. We've thrown them away. We've re-architected and rewritten them from the ground up to be iCloud apps. So that is iCloud.
Now, I'd love to say that we had a hand in helping him write that, but that just didn't happen. But I'll tell you how excited we were when we saw it and went, oh my God, that structure. It's right there. And so I guess a perfect illustration of the effect, of the power of turning your strategy into a story. Take something really complicated and make it really simple. Now, he didn't, that didn't come off his pen in 15 minutes. That was a lot of work going behind that. But anyway, if you hopefully you'll be challenged now to try and do that with any IT, IM, KM strategy that you're involved in, is to turn that into a story. We've written an enormous amount about this on our website, both in our blogs and white papers. So if you want more information, then just go there. There's heaps. Alternatively, give me a call or email or LinkedIn or whatever. But I'm hoping that this has maybe been a little confronting, maybe been a little challenging, but hopefully caused you to have some new thoughts about how you might go about communicating what you're trying to achieve to your organisation in a way that is much more human, much more memorable, and much more concrete, and therefore helps people understand what you're trying to achieve and gives them the ability to act strategically.